recorded instead of making
Uh,
like plugging in the Audacity.
So this is what I want you guys to remember from last week. Bit of a summary review. The commonly used effects, the ones we will use a lot, every morning probably, or every service rather, because we're going to have evening services now, are reverb and delay, different kinds of delay. Less commonly used would be vocal doublers and choruses. We'll see what they're like. And in mixing vocals, always use a high-pass filter. Get rid of that rumble. Listen for too much boominess or warmth in the low end and EQ that out by using a bell curve kind of a thing. And it usually centered around 250 hertz. 250 hertz is kind of the enemy of everything when you're mixing bands, except for acoustic guitar maybe. If like last Sunday, with a really simple lineup like that, the only thing occupying that space was the acoustic guitar. So I made it as kind of as big as I could. It's actually boosted 250 hertz, which is not normal. Then add some highs to improve articulation and stuff like that. And then once you add the highs, listen for harshness like we did last week, and try and find that and notch it out. And use a little bit of compression if you need to control an unruly singer. And then be really active about working with those harmonies. It's not a set and forget situation at all. Most sound engineers set it and forget it, and you can hear that it's not good.
This goes for the speakers as well, for like pastors.
If you've got, I don't know, I've gotten to the point where once you get them tuned in, like last week, I didn't know what was going to happen with Josh.
Yeah.
So I was like, I had the EQ screen up and ready to go, and when he started, he sounded a lot thinner than Jason. So I warmed him up and listened for feedback, and there wasn't any. He knows how to use one of these. He's obviously been using it a long time. So there was, 5 minutes of fiddling in the beginning. I looked at the compressor, make sure he wasn't hitting that too hard, and then I just set it aside and fell asleep. No. Listened to the sermon. That was the second service. So, yes, just feast your eyes. This is mostly for Micah, but anytime, the second full-length album that I produced, the drum kit was like this. We couldn't fit anybody else in the room. No, everybody else had to be in the control room.
Oh my gosh.
Just the kit and the drummer.
It's huge.
Yeah, it was a little bit out of control. I typically encourage drummers when I'm producing a record, if I'm pulling drummers, these days it's mostly singer-songwriters, so I'm putting bands together for them, and I pull a drummer in and I usually say, give me a rack tom and a floor tom and nothing else. If you can't get creative enough with that, with the kind of music we're doing, then you're the wrong drummer. And that's of course what we're going to be using on Sunday mornings. Here he is.
What's up, man?
So that's the setup we're going to be addressing. Well, actually, the homework, there's 3 toms, but he only plays 2 of them. The third track is sitting there, but you'll notice I think he hits it once. One thing to keep in mind, one philosophy, one approach with the drums is to think of them as your ultimate goal as it's one instrument. You want to make it sound like one instrument, even though it's 7 or something. That's a wonderful goal. I hardly ever get there, and a lot of times in modern music, the kick and the snare are like just huge and nothing else matters, you know, and they're kind of their own thing. So it just depends on the music, really. So for those of you who don't know, here's some terminology. The kick is the bass drum. I always call it the kick drum. Oh yeah, my illustrations. I had a rabbit snare, but I figured that was too gross and obscure. Snare drum, hi-hat is the thing on the side that they do, right, with the foot pedal and everything. Toms we'll have a rack tom and a floor tom. That's how they'll be labeled in the mixer, rack and floor, all right? And then the cymbals. All right, kick drum is maybe the most important drum in pop music, in modern music. I categorize what we do as pop, stylistically. Kick and snare, maybe they're both equally important, but the kick is really important. So it's really important to take your time to get this right during any sound check. Now, most of the time it'll be pretty dialed in, but every drummer, remember, these are going to be real drums now. Every single drummer and every drummer, and the same drummer on a Tuesday versus a Wednesday, they're going to play it differently. It's going to sound differently, okay? So you just go with it and adjust things appropriately. Kick drum is pretty hard to get right. It can be finicky. There's a bunch of tricks I'm going to show you. One of the tricks, one of the reasons why it's so important to get the kick drum right is that we measure the sound pressure level in the room with A weighting. If you remember the weightings that we talked about, okay? A weighting means you kind of ignore the super low end because your ears kind of ignore those at certain volumes, right? That means we can get away with some things. And one of the things you can get away with is you can make sure that people can feel the kick drum in their chest. And these days, most people are used to that and expect that. And if they don't hear it, the experience can be disappointing for them without them knowing why. So you can actually mix pretty quietly, and it psychologically feels loud, feels powerful if you get that kick drum doing its thing. Okay? So last Sunday we just had a cajon, and we'll talk about the cajon in a minute, but the cajon is essentially, the way I approach it in mixing is it's a kick and a snare in one. And you mic the front to get the snare bit, and you mic the rear to get the kick bit. And so I try to make that kick, or the back of the cajon, do the thump, 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 which is a little bit extreme, okay? But I was able to do it, and it made the music sound powerful, even though it was just three-piece, essentially, an acoustic three-piece. But then as soon as he stopped playing, everybody sat there, it went, you weren't all there for that. That was fun. So I actually used a gate to, once the signal, remember what a gate does is once the signal gets below a certain level, it turns it down even more. So that's what I did. I used a gate to control the feedback. So when they stopped making noise, it turned it down even more. And it fixed the problem. But if that were a really resonant stage, like my front porch is, or something like that, I'd probably have to do some more radical stuff or live without it. Anyway, so kick drums can be mic'd both front and back. Front, we're going to have a hole in the head.
Yeah.
Okay,
There
good. And we're gonna take the Beta 91A and just drop it in there, probably on a pillow. And you can adjust the tone of the drum with dampers like pillows inside and stuff like that, but we're gonna leave that up to the drummers to make it sound nice to them. And then we're gonna work with what they are happy with, because a happy drummer makes for a happy band. And so, you know, and I've told you before, generally the approach you should take as a sound person is that let the guys on the stage get the sound they like to hear with their instrument and work with it. And if there's problems, then you can walk up and, you know, say, well, can you brighten up the guitar a little bit? Can you turn up, turn down? You know, we don't usually have that problem because we got in-ears and everything's direct injected, but hopefully as we move forward, we'll be able to experiment with some real amps stuck away in some rooms in boxes and mic'd up. So
I'm planning on that
Yeah.
by week 1.
oh really? Okay.
Plan.
Oh, cool. That'll be fun. So throw lots of variables all at the same time.
All on week 1.
Excellent. So anyway, when you're miking it on the front, you're going for the thump, obviously, and a lot of times if you mic it well enough and have the right kind of microphone, you can get the slap with that beater as well. That slap is really, really, really important. Otherwise, I was listening to some tunes on the way over here, and I was kind of appalled, but maybe it's a new fad, but the kick was just this whoa, 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 whoa. It was like this ill-defined thing riding underneath all of this mush on top. And but then there was this one song that the kick was really well defined and the bass guitar was really well defined, and they seemed to be living in the same frequency zone. And I was like, how did they do that? I'm going to go back and listen to that in the studio on my monitors to see what they were doing, because that was really impressive to me. Anyway, obviously with the kick drum, no high-pass filter. This is one of the only only instruments you don't do that with. And you put it in the subwoofer bus. We're going to have a separate aux mix that just feeds the subwoofer. That's what we've got now. And it's got an EQ curve that it's a low-pass filter that cuts off at about 100 or 120 hertz and doesn't let anything up above that through. And then any signal that's below 120 goes to the subwoofer, okay? But you also have to send it to the bus. So anyway, send kick to the bus, to the subwoofer bus. The subwoofer is going to mostly be used just by the kick and just by the bass guitar, but also keys once in a while. But that's kind of it. Nothing else lives in it.
No vocals at all?
No vocals in the subwoofer, no.
You put toms.
Years ago we had that problem. Pre you.
Yeah, that is the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do that, it'll just, all you're going to get is ambient low frequency noise, because the voices aren't doing it. So you're just going to get airplanes going over you didn't know were going over, and trains, and hear the freeway. We're going to be close to the freeway. Okay, this is real key. Point number 3 is a real key to getting a good kick sound for the kind of music we do. Now remember, we're talking a specific kind of music here. If you're doing hip hop, the kick drum's just like a sine wave going woo, 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 woo. That's all it is, and that's not what we're doing. Okay, so at about 250 hertz, the first thing I do with a kick drum is I take a frequency point and I move it over 250 hertz and I go down and I spread it out. And what starts to happen is that you start getting clarity in the kick drum. Okay, and the snap, then you're able to turn the whole thing up a little bit more and you get more thump and you get more snap out of it. That really cleans up the kick, around 250, 300, depends on the kick drum. But how big of a kick drum do we have?
We have a 22-inch
22?
standard.
Yep, that's a pretty, like if you had a little 20-inch, or, I mean, I've seen even smaller than that.
Yeah.
Like for a jazz kit or something, that'll change. As a matter of fact, you might not even do it for something that's a small kick.
If you're doing two mics,
Yeah,
how do you EQ the second one?
the one that's doing the beater, you mean? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good question.
Is that a little bit more?
It's a little esoteric. I did want to mention that you can do that if you need more, if you want to get more of that slap going on. One of the things you got to realize is that if you're miking up the kick on the side where the pedal is, right, and then you've got another mic on the other side, what's happening with those two mics? This one is picking up the drum head. If he kicks the drum head is moving away from this mic and is moving towards the other mic. That means they're going to be out of phase. So you need to flip the phase on one of them so that they add together, or they're going to destroy each other, potentially. Sometimes accidentally sounds great, but I mean, you just never know. But typically that's what you have to do. But John, what I would probably try and do in that scenario is roll off everything below 500 or 600, and then I would use a pretty tight peak and move it around to look for the slap that I like. That's where I would start, and I might abandon it altogether, but I don't know. I don't typically do that in the studio. I typically try and get the mic that's in front of the kick just to sound good.
And that's what we're doing in the building, right? Just the one mic inside,
The one mic
right?
inside. The Beta 91, so the sound company, or the whatever they are, AV company, recommended different mics, and I said, no, I want this, because in a live situation, I would not, well, I don't know, I've never tried it, but I was going to say I wouldn't use this in the studio, but I don't know. But in a live situation, it actually has an EQ curve that dips out at 250, and then it adds, it boosts at about 4 kilohertz. It does that just by way of its design. And remember, did I say this? I've talked a lot. The right approach to getting good sound is to get the sound that you desire as close to the source as you possibly can. So if you want good vocals, first of all, get a good singer. Second of all, get a good microphone. Third, good mic pre. Now we've got them all, those are all built into the rig, so nothing we can do there. Fourth, then you start getting into gain and EQ and all that stuff, right? So in this case, I chose this microphone because it's a little, I won't say it's foolproof, but it's going to get you in the neighborhood right away. And you won't have to be so extreme with the EQ, but it's going to sound good right away. It's been my experience with it. Because I became aware of this mic in a portable church it was a rock and roll church. We handed out earplugs when you came in, and it was like a big jam thing that worship went on for like 35, 40 minutes. The services were about 2 hours, you know, so, and we had to set up and tear down the whole thing like we do now, but we had a semi-trailer full of stuff, not a regular trailer, semi-trailer full of stuff. And the stuff, you know, we had all these teams and everything, but everything just needed to work quickly. So we'd throw that in and they would just sound really good right away. So we'll see if it holds true in our world. So yeah, use a shelf or a bell at about 4 kilohertz to get snap. I typically start with a shelf because it ends up sounding more natural, but you end up, when you do that, remember a shelf's going to emphasize all the frequencies. So when you do that, you can start getting bleed from the other instruments. You can start hearing the snare drum through it, stuff like that. And sometimes that's fine, sometimes it's not. I'll do that first, and if I get too much bleed or there's phase issues or something like that, then maybe I'll put a high pass filter on it, a low pass filter on it, or I'll go for something that notches a bit and looks for that snap that I want. Yeah, well, that's the next point, and then that's the next 2 points. Okay. And then I put moderate to heavy compression on this with a slow attack. Remember what a slow attack does? Anybody want to tell me? On a compressor? Yes.
Sounds for a little bit and then it pulls it. Like,
Yeah, it doesn't turn on for a little bit. Slow attack means wait a little bit and then turn on, which means that you get those really nice transients right away. And then you get the main thump of the kick after that, and that's what the compressor hits. And you can turn the whole thing up now because that thump is under control, but you're able to brighten it up a lot because you can turn up the whole thing and get those transients. And then the thump becomes real consistent because, drummers, I don't know how they do it. How do you do it? My goodness.
Still trying to figure it out.
I mean, every limb functions independently, and they can chew gum at the same time. But usually hardly any drummers in the world are completely consistent on their kick, right? On the chorus, on the verse, they'll be a little quieter, and when they're doing a fill, they'll lighten up, and then when they get back to kick snare, then they get powerful again. And what you want to, as a front of house mixer, typically, is to have that kick 100% consistent all the time. Now, you can allow some dynamics in there. It depends on the kind of music, but typically that's what you're going for. And the way to get that is with some pretty strong compression and that slow attack that I was talking about. So those are my kick drum tips, okay? The other really, really important drum. Once again, it can be mic'd at the top and the bottom. We're going to start with just the top. We're going to try and keep it simple. If we don't like the tonality that we're getting, we will add a bottom mic. And if we don't like it, we'll probably experiment I'll bring a mic from my studio and we'll try it and see if that solves our problems or whatever. And if it does, then we'll invest in that. But right now we're going to just have a top mic. If you do mic top and bottom, you usually use the top mic to get the body and the snap, and then the bottom mic to pick up that snare, that high-end stuff. And it's nice to have that because you can then use faders to actually change the tonality of the microphone instead of the snare, instead of going to the EQ. Everybody follow me? Okay. We're going to use an SM57. That's that one that you can drive nails with. Remember I told you the story about I had one fail me for the first time in 35 years of using them or something like that. I took it home, I plugged it in, and it didn't work. So I fiddled with it this afternoon. I just took it apart, looked good, put it back together. It works. I can't make it stop working. So, okay. Use a high-pass filter like everything else. I wouldn't go too high with it because there's some nice thump in the lower frequencies. We got a nice deep snare. Do you have it here?
Mm-hmm.
Can we look at it? Where is it? It's a nice deep snare. That means it's going to have a nice wallop to it. Okay, depending on how it's tuned, but it's just gonna have a really nice full body timbre to it. So don't get too aggressive with the frequency, the high pass filter frequency. Okay, we don't want it in the subwoofer, but there. See how deep that is? Most of them are about 2/3 that deep. It's a nice snare.
Yeah.
Okay, this part is a little bit, I'm leaving this a little bit ambiguous because it really depends on the drummer, on the songs, on, I mean, like, if, I haven't experienced this much at this church. Well, I guess it's because it's an electronic kit, but we're probably gonna be using brushes on songs, right? Everybody knows what that is, right? I'd imagine we'll go for that. That's a totally different, that's like a different instrument when someone picks up brushes. And sometimes, of course, they'll do brushes in the verse and then in the chorus, you know, so that makes it fun. I want to avoid using hot rods if we can, because I just hate the way they sound. They're an in-between thing. They're a bundle of sticks. I don't know if you've ever seen drummers use those, but they're for drummers that play excessively loud, and you say, okay, I'm taking your sticks away and you play with these. And they can't get as loud. They just won't. But that's cruel and unusual punishment as far as I'm concerned. And they just don't sound very good. They make the drums not so good. So if you're doing like some really powerful anthem, you probably want this snare to sound big, right? So to do that, you actually add at about 250 or 300. You do a bell curve and you juice it up, and then maybe you move it around to see where it gets nice and fat, okay? Once again, strong compression with slow attack is typical for a lot of pop music, but our music has a lot of dynamic range and so you don't necessarily want to rob the drum kit of that dynamic range by getting too aggressive with compression. It just depends. I'm not going to put hard and fast rules on you, but I want you to know how to use your tools. Okay, so if you got a snare that's not getting fat because of EQ, it's not fat enough for some reason. Well, first of all, check your mic positioning. Okay, mic positioning is extremely critical. We talked about that as one of the tools, right? What you typically want with a snare drum is to have that SM57 pointing right at the middle. That's where the tonality is going to be. That's where the maximum thump is going to be. If you've got too much thump, put it out towards the edge. It'll brighten it up. Okay. The kick drum, I forgot to mention mic positioning. With that boundary mic that we've got, I don't know that positioning is going to be very important. Really, that's one of the reasons why it's nice for our uses, right? You're not going to have a lot of flexibility with tone, but we just want pretty good tone quickly. That's what we want.
Would you in theory get more slap if you put it towards the...
You might. I never had time to goof with it. You know, it was like they threw it in there. It was before in-ear monitors, and we didn't have a talkback mic, and I was 100 feet away and shouting at them. You know, so didn't have time. But that'll be fun to figure out, definitely. And once again, a shelf. Start with a shelf at about 4 kilohertz to try and brighten it up if you need to. And then plate reverb. It's really great. It can be night and day. It was 2 Sundays ago. No, it was last Sunday, even with the cajon. So it was the front side of the cajon, because that's kind of the snare of the cajon. I had a plate, well, not a plate reverb, but our reverb on it. And I did not have it on the back side, because that's kind of the kick. And there was that song where you transitioned, and the first thing you hear is the cajon. And I, by habit, kill the effects in between every song, because Nathan usually chats away, right? And so I did it, and then they started up, and it was like, oops, and then and you know, it was like, okay, here's a cajon sitting there, and then I flip the effects back on, and there, oh, there's a nice guy. I mean, you could really hear the difference. I haven't gone back to look at it's probably even worse on the broadcast mix. I haven't looked at it yet, but it's not a big deal, but it would have been better if I hadn't flaked out.
That have caused Nathan's vocals to like echo? Is that?
Well, yeah,
That's-
because of
that
what
was,
I do,
think,
yeah.
on the second song, would have been between the first and second song this week.
Yeah.
So I went back and listened to the broadcast, and there was one where I think Gloria Stay was like, day, day, day.
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, I did some
During the
trippy.
song would have been intentional, yeah.
I did some trippy stuff this
Okay.
week. On 2 songs.
Do you adjust parameters to get different sounds for the drums from song to song?
Oh, I can, yeah.
Or is it more of a, you get a nice sounding snare and you leave it for the morning?
I try to do that, okay? But when I'm actively listening, and you can do this with any music you hear on the radio or Spotify or anything, please do this. What is it that's making this song sound really good? What's happening with the drums? Can I hear the snare? Why does it sound the way that it sounds? How does it sound? The kick. What kind of a kick are they going for here? Like I think I mentioned earlier, music's been ruined for me because I just go, well, I could have mixed that better. No, I don't do that. But I analyze it instead of just enjoying it sometimes too much, But on the other hand, it's made me really enjoy it when it's really mixed well. It's made me really enjoy it. But I can't go to any local live music things unless I mix it. Oh boy. For instance, actively listening on a Sunday morning, I might realize partway through song 2, I'm not hearing the snare anymore. And typically it's just a level thing. All right, I go back and I pull up the way that I've got the mixer set up on my little portable thing that I can stick in my pocket. That's why I use it. It's a wonderful size. Is I've got all the drums on a DCA, which I don't know if I've talked about yet, digitally controlled amplifier. What it is you can create a mix of a bunch of channels and then tell the mixer, I want to control all of those faders with one fader. Keep their relationships the same, but I want to be able to turn them, the whole kit and caboodle, up and down, right? That's what the function of a DCA is. So anyway, I've got one fader on my mix pad on the left, that is the drums. Drums up, drums down, right? So if there's a blend problem between kick and snare, I'm hearing everything else but the snare, then I have to open up the channels 1 through 18 view and tweak them in that way. So it's just a button away, but so the answer is even the drums are dynamic. And if you've got a tune where like the toms are really important, we've got a few like that. I don't typically keep the toms as anything too dominant if they're little fills, but sometimes I'll go back and really make them louder than the snare sometimes, depending on what the song wants, or if I know there's this really great fill coming up or something. So once again, it's just really, really dynamic. Any other snare questions?
I think I saw you use the 57 on the front of the cajon too, is that correct?
Yes, we're going to talk about cajones in a minute.
And are all the effects in a bus, or can you put like a compressor on each of the drum?
Every channel in the Avantis, every channel has input gain, EQ, input gain gate, compression, EQ, 2 insert points for various effects,
Okay.
and all the bus sends. It's got like 42 buses, something like that.
Okay.
So just to understand, sorry, like on those insert points, you could choose an effect to put just on that one channel?
Yes,
Instead of sending it out to a bus that has the effect on it, is
Yes.
that right? Okay.
yes, you insert a particular effect on just that thing.
Gotcha.
So for compression, for like, let's say just the compression and EQ, those are gonna be channel specific?
Yep,
And then reverb and delay will probably be a bus?
yep. There's probably gonna be 2 reverbs available and 2 delays available. And there's so many buses and so many effects, we'll probably, just for fun, throw a vocal doubler out there and a chorus out there too, just for fun, see what happens. And then everybody gets their own stereo in-ear mix too,
Exciting.
that will really, really,
In your ear mix.
it'll be stereo, yeah.
And you get to mix it yourself too, so like
Yep.
if I'm drumming and I want the rack sound to be more left on my side.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, I don't know about that.
Each individual.
I don't know about panning.
I can't pan. I wouldn't-
That's an interesting
I wouldn't
question.
think so, but-
Where is
That's an
that
interesting
on
question. I
stage?
doubt that you
Right,
can
so
pan.
like, get spatial
Um,
awareness.
I think you're gonna be stuck with what I do.
Just bump it to the left.
Centered.
Yeah.
Centered's better than reversed.
Yeah, it is.
I don't wanna hear it.
That would be really disorienting.
Yeah, well, when I mix
It should be
audience
what you're
view.
seeing,
Yeah, so that would screw you up if I did that. I mean, we'll see what the room is like, but typically you cannot do fun stereo stuff in a live mix situation, with the exception of I do it with effects and I do it with keys, just because that can sound, you can get away with it in a live situation.
For the inserts, those
Mhm.
are just for external effects, right? They're not for the.
They're built into the box.
I know they're built in, but are the insert points for the built-in, or are they like the physical insert?
They're for the built-in. Some mixers do allow you to send the signal out and back.
Mhm.
And this is something that I want to understand, that I think the Avantis can let us do that, because what I want to do, sort of as a graduate level mixing thing, is have a laptop available with some effects in it. So we'll see. I mean, I went to see, I was visiting my daughter in Los Angeles, and we went to the Guggenheim, which was really a cool experience. And we're just doing the art thing, and then we go in the courtyard, and there's this whole rig set up, like stage and a really great sound system and all these lights. And it's like, what's this? I said, well, it's Big Black Delta is playing. Anybody know who Big Black Delta is? They are an astonishing sort of art, well, it's one guy actually, sort of an art rock thing. But because it was in LA, he had a whole horn section and all this stuff. But anyway, I bring him up because he does really innovative things with his vocals, where he'd sing like this, like he'd sing a wail a note, and then he'd whack his keys and it'd go like that up, because he would process it through his computer, and then break up like in the Matrix, like that. You do all of these, and not just like reverbs and stuff, but actually radically manipulate the tone and pitch of his vocals, sample it, and then have it disintegrate and stuff like that. It was really, really an amazing experience. But the sound guy screwed it up. LA sound guy, right? He blew out the right speaker stack. He had it so loud. And it was a very powerful PA. And I was like, this is too much. I mean, it's a loud, loud band. He really, really depends on a lot of bass, really cool bass stuff that he does. So the guy was really juicing it, and that side just kept cutting out, and then it just went away. So, bummer. But I got to see Big Black Delta. It was so cool. Anyway, hi-hat. So we're going to use the SM81s on the hi-hat. They are, if you'll recall, they're the long, skinny silver ones. They're a small diaphragm condenser. What are those good for? They're good for things that go ping and tingle, tingle, and And they're good for the 12th fret on an acoustic guitar, so you get all of that detail. If you want lots of detail, lots of high-end detail, small diaphragm condensers are great for that. Hi-hats fall into that category, but they're loud. So what you have to do is you have to, on that thing, I think I showed you, there's a little circular control that allows you to turn a pad on that knocks the output of the microphone down 20 decibels. And there's another switch that allows you to choose a high-pass filter. And there's a slight slope and a heavy slope. It's almost as if they expected you to use this on hi-hats and drums and things. So switch on the pad and set the steep slope to high-pass, set a steep slope high-pass filter. I mean, that's just the way it'll be set. You guys probably won't have to think with it, but if something sounds off, go look at it. Mic positioning is going to be important. It always is. The challenge with mic positioning on drums is you can get a great mic position and the drummer can't play his drums because the mic's in the way. So it's always a compromise. And also when you're talking about hi-hat, typically the drummer has the hat right about here, right next to the snare, and he's hitting it right about here, and he's hitting the snare right here. That's this far apart, and it's loud. Okay, so you have to try and position the snare mic so that the null, remember the snare, cardioid mic picks up in the front, and there's nothing in the back, right? So the null point is pointing at the hi-hat. But you do that, it bangs into the hi-hat. It's because the hi-hat's so close for most drummers. So there's a compromise. You have to move it a little bit to the side, you get a little bit of a bleed. And then what's the nicest way to mic the hi-hat is, I try to do it, is right where those sticks are going to be hitting the cymbal. Because you get all that little fun little stuff, right? Once again, that typically gets in the way of the drummer, and it typically picks up a lot of snare. So we'll be fiddling with that, and from Sunday to Sunday it's going to change because drummers are going to move stuff around. You know, every drummer likes things a little bit differently. So, all right. Use a high-pass filter at about 400 hertz because they just don't make anything below that typically. So, Micah, bright or dark?
Well, you say I prefer bright, but I prefer dark.
See.
100%. I'll take dark any day.
Plus one.
Most drummers.
Yep.
So I just don't know what your problem is.
Dark and dry, baby. All day long.
Listen to how it blends with everything else. I tend to brighten it up from what the drummers like because it's not getting through everything else that's going on. If it does, you know, I'll leave it the way it is, but, well, not ever, no. Okay, it's confession time. I always brighten it up.
Good thing we bought dark symbols.
So anyway, every instrument on that stage has to serve the song. The song is what it's all about. Even the voices have to do it, okay? If a dark hi-hat serves the song, well, okay. We'll let it pass. But just that's the way you've got to be thinking. Now we're gonna get to the sound check module, and we're gonna talk about the order of things, and we always start with the drums. Unless the drummer's late, then we do everything else. But almost always start with the drums, and sort of it's the foundation of the house, right? Get those things sounding really great as a cohesive unit. If you are ever around when I'm doing a sound check, I actually go through in this order, and then I have them play the whole kit for a while I blend it. And then I have them play, and then I do bass and I have them play together because those two are the foundation of everything. So you got to get them right. no compression on the hi-hat, ever. That's been my experience. And brightened to taste with a high shelf. And a high shelf, I've never been in a situation where a high shelf didn't work, because that's where all the cymbals live, is up there. So
We're not gonna do it, but like in EDM, would you use a compression?
oh, you might, yeah, that's true. That would make it sound like more like a. I mean, if you compressed a hi-hat really hard, it'd sound like steam blowing out of a. You go like that, and you've heard that in some music, right? So, sure, that's a good question. On the rack tom, we are actually going to use one of the mics that the company suggested, because the one I wanted isn't manufactured anymore. I've got them in my studio and I really like them, and they're not manufactured anymore. So I said, okay, we'll try yours. And it's a medium diaphragm dynamic mic. By the way, the SM81 is a condenser mic. That means it needs power. Okay. So it's nice and small, so you can tuck it in there. And we'll see what it sounds like. They said they like it. Okay. Give it a high pass at about 200 to 250, depending on how the drummer tunes his drums. Some people tune their drums low. The rack tom usually doesn't have anything below that. Rack toms, unless they are tuned really well, can sound really boxy. Am I right, drummers?
Yep.
Okay, so you're going to tune things really well, right? So we won't have this problem. However, most church drum kits are horribly neglected and they sound like cardboard boxes. So I had to battle this all the time. And at the last church, we kind of ran out of drummers, so we had guitar players playing drums, and nobody knew how to tune them. And anyway, this boxiness occurs at about 300 hertz. That's where I start searching for it and notching it out, trying to get rid of it. A key to making toms sound good is to be able to hear that stick hit. And then your brain then, as a listener, your brain is then all ready for that tone that follows, because that tone that follows, if you're in a band with electric guitars, well, it's living right in the same range as the electric guitars. And so if you don't have that psychological clue to be hearing that, it's just going to get masked. Remember we talked about masking? It's going to get masked by the electric guitars. And acoustic guitars too. Similar thing. Mild compression with slow attack, start with that. If you've got a drummer that's really inconsistent, or the drum or the toms need to sound really, really powerful, you can get more aggressive with the attack. That fattens things up. You can usually turn them up more if you add more compression, but then of course remember that then what you're really doing is you're expanding, so that when the sound stops, that microphone is sitting there open, picking everything up, and you can start to get feedback and stuff. So just be aware. That what I just described to you took me 3 years to figure out. Why do compressors always do that? Anyway. And then plate reverb is magic on toms. A floor tom is essentially, in my mind, is essentially a kick drum turned on its side and tuned a little higher. That's it, except that you don't want a kick drum to ring. You want a kick drum to just thump. You want a floor tom to ring out. Not excessively, but anyway. So I did something that really confused the AV company again. And I said, I want this D6 mic for the floor tom. That's a kick drum mic. that's the secret weapon that I use in the studio. I use kick drum mics on the floor tom, and they just sound great right at the beginning. So it's kind of a cheat, but it works really well. Add the floor tom to the sub bus. Add a little bit. Experiment with that. You can optionally high pass filter it at about 100 hertz, so it doesn't really so that the kick and the floor tom don't interfere with each other. But like if things are muddy down there, go look at this and mess with that high pass filter. Generally, I would recommend that. Typically, well, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Brian?
You're talking about the high pass filter?
I'm talking about the high pass filter on a floor tom. What do you do?
I usually have a little bit of a high pass filter.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm at 100, maybe more like 80.
Yeah, something like that. I mean that approximately 100. I said so. So just use your ears and get that nice thing, because we're all about drama in this church. So we want those things, add drama, and then once again, so I go for 250 hertz. I start notching that out to see if it starts sounding better, and usually it does. And then once again, try and get definition in the high end so you can hear those sticks whacking it, so that people know that what's coming. Mild compression with slow attack, add plate reverb. Kind of a general formula that works pretty well. So we've got plate reverb on which 3 drums?
Toms.
Yes, well you know. Toms and snare. Never kick. Never, well not never kick, okay. Usually not kick. I doubt we'll ever do that in our situations. I do it on some records, but never hi-hat, never overheads, which we're going to get to next. So we're going to have 1 overhead mic. Some times they'll have 2, but and the mic positioning on this is going to be critical as well, because you think of it from the microphone's point of view, what you're trying to do is get a picture of the whole top of the kit. So you're picking up the cymbals, of course, but you're also picking up some action from the toms. So you're getting more of that wonderful stick noise that from the toms. A lot of times I just can't get it from the close mics, so I'll rely on the overheads to get it.
We're gonna have 1.
We're going to have 1. We're going to start with 1. All right. Once again, keeping it simple. That is live. I've never used more than 1. And there's been some scenarios where there was a sound company, providing the rig, and they weren't even going to mic the top of the kit at all. I'm like, oh no, you can hear the cymbals out front, and it's like, well, it's not that you can hear them, it's what's the tonality. Okay, you can hear the whole kit out front, So I would always make them set one up. Anyway, once again, this is an SM81, so it's a condenser mic, so it needs power, and you want to turn that pad on, and you want to turn that steep slope on. We're not after the low-end stuff with this. We're after the high-end detail with this one. And be fairly aggressive with the high-pass filter, because of phase considerations, the top of kit microphone can do funny things to mid-range and low-range frequencies. If you think about it, when we were talking about phase, if you think about it, the lower frequencies have longer wavelengths, which have more of a tendency to, is this true? They have more of a tendency to cancel out, at least experientially for me. So anyway, high pass filter on 200 or 300 hertz. Experiment with that if you have time. Trust your ears, okay? These are guidelines. No compression, no reverb.
What's your gut on mic placement with a single SM81?
kind of right above the drummer's head. Kind of try and hear what the drummer's hearing. I mean, he's tuning the drum kit. He or she is tuning the drum kit, so it sounds great from where they're sitting. So let's take advantage of that, right?
How high up?
24 to 36 inches. Let's see. Well, from your head, about 12 to 24 inches. 24 is a little high in a live situation. You're picking up everything else. High enough so that the pickup pattern gets all the toms and the cymbals. But not higher than that, because then it starts picking up, people moving around on stage and stuff like that. And other instruments when you've got live instruments on the stage. Good question. In the studio, I always use a stereo pair.
Split.
What's that?
Split.
Well, sometimes. Sometimes I'll do, there's a configuration called an XY configuration, where you just cross the microphones like this. It's trying to simulate like what your ears hear. Sometimes I'll do them apart from each other. Mostly I've been doing that lately. I've got a pair of ribbon mics that sound really nice up there because they control the brightness of the cymbals. So in the studio I kind of do the opposite of what you do live. I'm trying to calm them down, and I'll brighten them up if I need to with a little EQ. But a ribbon mic, their frequency curve from low to high in your direction. So low to high, it goes like this. So that means it tames all of those high frequencies right out of the gate. If I want them, I can add them back, but it can be pretty difficult with cymbals, especially if someone's really aggressive on them, to get rid of them in a recording. All right. So, feel the kick. Always strive to have the kick have definition. So when the band kicks into that really powerful chorus where everybody's in the pool and slamming power chords and stuff like that, and the bass is doing, all that stuff, make sure that kick's going poof, 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 so you can always hear that snap. Probably when they're doing all that other stuff, you're not hearing the thump anymore. You might be feeling it, but you're not hearing it. So always be able to hear that snap, even if it's just a little. Doesn't have to dominate at moments like that, but even if it's just a little. So a lot of times it can mean when you listen to the kick drum by itself, it sounds really strange. But when it's there with the whole band, it fits just right. Sometimes you have to exaggerate that snap so much. Typically live, not as much as sometimes some of the stuff I have to do in the studio sometimes. It depends on what you're after, once again. But live, that kick is the heartbeat of the song. And if you're not catching that heartbeat, it's hard to sing. It can be harder to get caught up in the emotion, et cetera, et cetera. Snare should also always be heard. Listen for what folks are doing on the hi-hat. I think, like Micah, you use the hi-hat a lot. I don't think you do very much, Brian. So different strokes for different folks, If someone who's doing some really fun stuff on the hi-hat, it can be really sweet to pull that really out front and feature it in the mix. At other times, it's more important to just have it sitting right in there with everything else. Stick sound on the toms is really important. So I've kind of said all this stuff. It's kind of a summary, and the last sentence is pretty important. Okay. So basically, what I'm saying is, you can forget everything I just said. Just do it how you want.
So Matt,
Yes.
I know it's gonna depend week to week because the drummers are gonna be different,
Yeah.
but like all this stuff, like set the high pass filter to this.
Yeah.
Is that gonna be like set on each?
That'll typically be left over from the previous
It's
week.
not like every single week you have to.
No,
do
no.
all of that?
No, it's
How would
gonna,
I remember that?
no, yeah, no.
Okay.
That's a good question, and it'll typically it'll be set. Like, you know, we'll go in there and I will set the drums. I will spend, me and whoever is the victim will spend probably an hour getting the drums to sound right, positioning mics and stuff. When we're in the studio, we can take 3 to 4 hours to get the drums right. Some some bands on some records take a week to get the drums right. That's overindulging in my opinion, but anyway, when I was in the band that I was in the world class studios, and $250 an hour, we take 8 to 10 hours to get the drums right. So expensive drum sounds. So anyway, that'll typically be set, and then you'll just go in and fine tune it, depending on who the drummer is, and the drums, the heads will loosen up and get old, and then they'll replace them, and they'll be brand new again, and it's going to be pretty dynamic, but you won't have to remember all that. That's for sure. The Cajoni. We talked about this a little already. It's a kick and a snare. A good Cajoni player will. The first time I experienced that was on one of the concerts on my porch. It was one of the very early ones, and there's this really good studio drummer in Milwaukee, and he came out to. I don't remember who he was playing with. Must have been my neighbor. Must have been Keith. But he made that thing. He was holding like tambourines and things while he was working with the cajon, and he made that thing. It sounded like he was playing a full kit. It was astonishing. It's the best I've heard it played. Everybody here does a really good job, but he was definitely the best. But there's so many tones that come out of that thing. You guys, if you were in church on Sunday, you heard some of that. And your job as a sound person is to faithfully get those tones out front. This is the whole kit in a scenario like that. So once again, it's real important. We mic it both front and back. I was very happy when I came, before I was hired or not, but I came one time and I saw the cajon set up and I saw it was mic'd front and back, and I said, well, good for these guys. So there's a lot of people just mic the front and forget about it, And it's like, what? So I was favorably impressed. So the SM57 is kind of taking the role of the snare thing, but with that front, you can kind of, depending on how good they are with their hands and whether they're using, like Brian actually uses a kick pedal, which is a cool innovation. Micah used brushes last time, really nice, and then the hand work. So when they slap at the top, they're doing the snare thing, and they slap thump in the middle, you get the kick kind of a sound. So the 57 at the front is kind of doing the job of the snare mic, but it's also kind of doing the job of the toms and everything else, right? But 57s are really good at stuff like that. They're the very cheapest good mic you can buy. They're $100 each. So EQ to get the snap and some body. So how would you get the snap? Anybody? We've been talking about snap. How did we get the snap?
High shelf.
High shelf, yes, about 4 kilohertz neighborhood. And thump, like a, not the thump, but like a like something that's in the range of the toms, frequency-wise, that's around, gonna be around 250, 300 hertz. You might wanna bump that. But use a high-pass filter on that front one at about 100 hertz or higher, probably not too much higher. And then the D6, that's that low tom mic that's actually a kick drum mic. We're going to use it like a kick drum, and you're going to EQ that back like a kick drum. Now that back is actually going to get a whole lot of snap in it because it's physically close to the front. But more importantly, if you mic it right, you're going to be able to get some of that thump going on. But once again, with the subwoofer situation, be careful because we might get some feedback going on. Now the stage in the new building is like sand-filled concrete or something, right? So it's not going to resonate unless there's an earthquake or an atomic bomb. The subs are notched in the front of the stage, right, underneath.
Sure.
You'd have to really push those to get it to do anything to that stage. So that's why they designed it that way. So we shouldn't have that problem. But in the gymnasium, think of that stage. Now it's got a lot of legs, but it's just kind of a big drum head. So that's why we can have problems from time to time. So,
B flat, it was B flat.
It's B flat.
Yeah, B flat.
yeah, it was.
It was.
Yeah, experiment with compression. I like to, if there's a cajon in use, it means it's an acoustic scenario. And acoustic scenarios generally you want to be looser with compression. You're not talking about pop music anymore. You're talking about hanging out in the living room kind of a vibe, right? So not so much compression, not on the instruments. You're still probably going to need it on vocals to a degree, but not on the instruments. Watch out for bass feedback fixed with a gate. The djembe. Same kind of thing. I think you guys have only used the djembe once since I've been here. By my request, I think, even, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Djembe is really, really fun. You can get that kick and snare thing happening even much more so on a djembe. It's got a really nice low end thump thing going on, and it can simulate toms, and then it's got this really nice high pitch. You slap it on the rim, this really nice, well-defined high pitch snap going on. I like them a lot. So you do kind of a similar approach that you do with the cajon. You mic the front and the back, and we'll use the 57 for the top, but you could also use the SM81. If the 57 is not bright enough, throw the 81 on there. That'll really brighten it up. And use the kick drum mic for the bottom and EQ it like a kick drum. And once again, like the cajon, this is actually just a cut and a paste from the cajon with a few mods. Watch out for bass feedback and fix with the gate. And we're gonna go here. I threw congas under everything else. I know it's not cool to do that, but and congas are actually 3 drums. What are they? The conga, the
The
quinto,
the congan, and the tumba. And
tumba.
then there's actually a retumba.
Oh,
And a
really?
re-quinto, if you're with the tiny pinch guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's
Wow.
technical. So yeah, 3 main ones.
Okay. And there's lots of other things too, like
Oh.
timbales and go-go bells and anyway.
That's what we're missing.
So with congas, if someday I hope to ask my brother to join us.
Sweet.
He's a phenomenal Latin percussionist, and so, but he. Okay. Anyway, I'll back up. So use an SM81 on the 57 for the top, and last time Mike only brought 2, right?
Yeah.
There's
yeah.
3. You can typically have 3, but like you said, there's 5 actually. So EQ, mic each one, so you have control over each one. Now, I've got some homework tracks and that I've recorded in my studio, and I took all the EQ off them and I took all the effects off them. They are congas, mic'd, I think, with an SM81, but it's just a stereo. Sorry, it's not each individual drum. All right. I would say live, mic each individual drum, so you have a little control over the volume. All right. EQ for snap and body, included in the mix. I went to see my brother the other day at Okachi Lion Days in this band that he's in, and he was just a prop. Couldn't hear him at all. Not at all. Not at all. So I'm annoyed about that, so I put that line in there. There's lots of other stuff, none of which we use shakers. But for all of that tiny tinkly stuff, use an SM81. You'll pick up, if you think about that, physical diaphragm is much smaller. It can move faster, all right? And that's why you need, well, it's one of the reasons why you need extra amplification in there. Actually, the electronics is not for amplification, it's to charge. Okay, never mind. I'm digressing. Anyway, small diaphragm condensers are really good for metallic compression, but you have to do the mic pad and the steep bass roll-off thing, and be really aggressive with a high-pass filter. I mean, you're just making tinkly sounds, right? So you don't need any of that stuff. And this is really key. Have the percussionist, I did this to Michael last time, have the percussionist move the instrument sideways to the mic. So he's got the shaker, and he's doing this. It's gonna go shh, shh, like that, because he's distorting the mic when he's shaking towards it, because it gets loud. It gets too loud sometimes for the mic. Have him shake it like this. It's not natural for drummers to see a mic. They go like that. Make them go like this, and you'll get much better results.
We have a plethora of 81s, 57s.
We are going to have 157.
We've got
Right.
257.
You do now? Okay. And
Yes,
we haven't
currently
purchased the 81s
257.
yet, have we? I mean,
That's
oh,
on Tech
oh,
Company, I believe, right?
yeah.
We told them what we wanted.
Yeah. So we're going to have two 81s.
So
If we get to the place where we've got a drummer and a percussionist,
Like Easter.
we'll have to borrow some of my stuff, or if we decide this is going to happen more often, we'll buy stuff.
And then there's one
That's a good
like,
question.
Amps, guitar amps, right? Probably 57?
57.
Yeah, so we need more.
Or an equivalent. There's some other interesting mics for guitar amps, but 57s are a good standby.
Third stage for musical instruments and when they're coming out.
Well, the thing about it is that these can be onesie, twosie purchases as we develop,
Yeah.
right? They're not going to be massive
No.
budget things. So
Mine for that.
we're at the lab already. Oh, there's no clock up there. What am I going to do?
We have 15 minutes.
Oh man.
We're good.
All right. Other computer.
Getting ready to move, so just the clock.
So, whoops, actually I wanted to, let's go back to this here. I wanted to point something out to you. Wake up. Got three things for you guys to goof with, okay? I've got an entire drum kit with two toms. It includes two overheads, and it includes room mics too, if you really want to goof around. But you can ignore the room mics for the sake of this exercise if you'd like. And I've got a cajon track, and unfortunately it's a single track. I don't know, if I would have double mic'd it, I would have had two tracks. I don't remember what I did with that. And then a congas too. I did not have a djembe track. I've never had one in the studio. I can't believe it. I went through my 20 years of doing stuff and I couldn't find one.
They are not the same song, I assume, so.
Oh, no,
they
no.
all fit together, right? So
No, they
it's-
don't fit
it's
together
pretty
at all.
separate.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Now, I happened to pull them in the same project here for tonight, but, and you might want to for convenience sake, but they are not the same song. You'll get very confused if you
What's happening?
try to,
Is this
yeah.
my fault? I don't know.
All right, so I have the cajon and congas muted. So this is what we've got. So I chose this one because it's got lots of tom work. The whole first part is all this rumbly stuff. Then you get later on to a straight pattern, okay? With hi-hat work and cymbal crashes and stuff. So let's stop. Let's have some fun here and listen to the kick.
If you recall, can you also mention what mics you used?
I've got, for the kick, I've got this AKG something. That's not manufactured anymore. For the snare, this is a while ago, and I do all sorts of stuff with snares. I've got a boundary mic that I use sometimes. I've got a really high-end Neumann that I use sometimes. Sometimes I use a 57. So the short answer is no, I can't tell you. The long answer is I will go on and on and on. So we'll pull up the mixer here, and we're soloing the kick drum, and right away you can see and hear. Let's turn it up a bit. So there's a lot of snap going on. That's pretty good, but it's a little weak. Let's see what we can do about that. Let's have a look at the EQ. Wow, that's interesting. So I can see the snap peeking up right about here. You see that once in a while? So that's nice, but I think what I did with this track is I think I ran it through an EQ before I recorded it. And I got this tuned in. This is actually pretty good right out of the get-go. There's not a lot of power in the thump, and there's inconsistency. You can hear he's kind of light and then hard and light and hard and light and hard. Real typical. This guy's a really masterful drummer. This drum track that you hear is about, the song is about a 5-minute, 7-minute epic opus thing, and about the first 2.5 minutes was that whole tom pattern with variations and stuff. I had him double track the drums, and he played it twice exactly the same without rehearsal. I could not believe he did that. And this is one set of those tracks. So, but you can see what I'm doing here, if you look down here at the frequency that I'm changing it to, you can hear this woolliness that I'm talking about. That boxiness, you hear that? That's typically what you get when you first turn on the microphone, and you want to pull that out so you get rid of it, right? Now this, see what I did is I emphasized the bass a little bit, but it started to get a little boxy, so I pulled out right around well, it's 165 actually. So that's actually sounding pretty good. But I don't like how inconsistent it is. So I'm going to throw in a compressor here. I'm going to put that attack out about 30 milliseconds here. And that's some pretty, whoops, that's, come on. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. I want to switch it to the different, there we go. So this is the kind, this is more the control set that you will have in the Avantis. That other one was a different kind. So we've got the threshold. This needle is telling you that it's actually compressing a little bit already, but the compression ratio is not very strong. Now that snap, for my taste, is actually too much, I think. If I can. I don't know, something like that. So you can hear the kick is more consistent now. Is it? And there's a nice thump and there's a really exaggerated snap. Now we'll leave that for the time being. Live, that probably would be pretty appropriate. I don't know if it'd be appropriate. It probably is appropriate for this song, because I remember I had two kits going and there's these like metal guitars going and stuff like that. So it wasn't cutting through unless I put that snap in it. Listen to all that bleed. But if you design the sound correctly, bleed can become your friend. Okay, you don't necessarily have to fight it all the time. That's what I try to do, because it sounds a lot more natural. In the 80s, they used to try and get each drum to like be in its own room, like you couldn't hear any other drum, and it's a particular sound, like the pop metal bands like Pantera and Def Leppard and stuff. That's the kind of sound that they had. But these days, people are much more amenable to hearing the bleed that I'm talking about. So you can, sorry, I'm going to have to go to where the snare is actually doing something here. So that snare sounds pretty nice, but he likes chewing his snares really high, okay? He likes a real pop. And it worked with the song, and I respected his choices, so. Now he's doing lots of nice, they're called ghost notes. Hear that? Those can get really lost in a big production, right? So that's another use of compression. Now it's going to rob it of the dynamics. Okay, that's kind of what compression does, right? So those ghost notes are a little bit quiet, and then he does the slap of the actual downbeat, right? What we'd like to do is get those ghost notes to be as loud as the hit, for sake of a live scenario. So we can try and use compression for that. It's not. There we go. Gosh, that's weird. Okay. So, as I'm making the compressor more aggressive, listen to what's happening to those ghost notes. they should come up and be a similar level. Now, they're gonna be a different tone, so we're gonna still kind of have the feel, but they're gonna be more, you're gonna be able to hear them more readily when they're in a mix. Without, with. You can definitely hear them better, right? But there's still a differentiation between the downbeat and the ghost notes. So you're not losing much of what's going on performance-wise. You're just making it able to be heard. Now, I wouldn't probably be that aggressive in the studio. Probably would be live, okay? And then if you wanna, I'm not sure that we're gonna, that the tonality, the frequencies are even there. Oops. And this is doing the thing where it's not letting me pull up the EQ again. All right, well, let's see if we can work with the frequencies. I'm gonna take the compressor out, and I'm gonna see if I can add a little bit more thump to the snare. I might not be able to. There we go. That kind of muddies it up a little bit. I don't know if I like that or not, but. So, what time is it? Okay, 8 o'clock. So, anyway, that's a starting point. And you've got conga tracks, cajon tracks, tom tracks. I didn't, actually, let me do one more thing here. I want to add the plate to this. Makes a big difference. No plate. Plate. Really, it's very nice. In an actual live mix, I'd probably add even more. When it's soloed, you know, it's a lot. But in a live mix, when you get everybody else in the pool, you don't actually hear the plate as this separate thing. But if I kill it, you go, what happened? So it's one of those, a lot of times when you're using effects, that's the kind of reaction you want. You would miss it if it's not there, but it's not obviously there, unless you're doing something trippy like stuff I do. The big echoes and stuff like that. That's a different story. So remember, plate on snare and the toms. Sounds really cool. So go home, download these files, play with them, and we'll see you next week where we're doing something else. Bass, guitars, I think. But it'll be more of this specific instrument, a lab, all that stuff. Did anybody have any questions, by the way, about the vocal mixing and stuff? I got, Holden actually sent me his mix.
Nice.
Oh,
So he gets a little gold star.
I wasn't sure where I was supposed to.
No. The problem with doing that, I thought about having people do that, but the problem with doing that is that my first reaction is, okay, let's sit down and talk about this, and I can't, you know? So that's gonna have to wait till we're really in the room. And I don't know how I'll approach it. There's a lot of you, which is wonderful, by the way. But I might just have somebody take over the controls and say, okay, make that sound good, with your knowledge, you know. I really want you to drive with just me watching, but typically, I don't have the luxury of doing a training course like this. So what I do is I'll just mentor one person for like 6 or 8 weeks. We mix together, and I first two or three times they just watch me what I'm doing, and I explain everything that I'm doing, and then I hand them another pad and I say, okay, I want you to co-mix with me, co-pilot. And then I'll start, I'm not hearing enough of that lead vocal. That guitar sounds pretty thin. I'll tell them what I'm hearing, and then they go and fix it. And then finally I say, take over, I'll be right here. So that's how that's gonna go. Right?
Is that actually our mixer?
No,
just a,
that's my DAW.
okay.
So the one I don't recommend, anyone buy. Except crazy people. Sounds really good. The DAW does, but.
But we can use our
Yeah.
audio, or the one that we downloaded, correct?
That's right. So yeah, download, there's 2 zip files and then just a raw track, and download them, import them, mix them, EQ them, add a plate. Experiment with other reverb. Experiment with reverb on the kick, see what it does. Mix the whole drum kit, put just a big reverb on the whole drum kit, see what it does. Experiment.
Cool.
That's the point of all this. I need you to get a feel for what these various frequencies do, and so when you hear boxiness, you go, oh man, I know, 300 hertz. Oh. Okay, that's all I got for you tonight.
Thank you.
Very welcome.